at meetings, and I've heard him talk at meetings, and ran into him at the new hall up there on 5th. Just thought, I just would like to hear his story. So I just asked. I just said, hey, would you like to speak? And he said, yeah. So here he is. Let's give him a big round of applause.
Damon, alcoholic.
Hey.
I rarely ever talked about my childhood. Usually I try to talk about, I speak in terms of early recovery, a little bit about how I got here. Anyway, I started off as a small brown child in a middle-class neighborhood in Southern California. I was shy, sheltered, and naive. And my mom was like a hardcore controller. And I didn't have any original thoughts of my own. My mom dressed me till I was almost 12. I didn't have any choice of what I wore, so it was really controlled. Incidentally, I'm just scrolling through Facebook, not a lot of guys come up, but this guy, Neil, comes up, and I go, well, and then we have like 25 friends together that we know. Well, I said, what the hell? I had that we confirmed that we became friends, and then he walks in the door tonight, and he goes, hey, So that's synchronicity for me. Anyway, so I stuttered because I was so controlled. I didn't have any self-expression. So I stuttered, making Porky the Pig sound straight. I had a lisp, so I didn't speak very much, and I didn't respond well to adults. So when my teachers called after me, rather than be made fun of or get questions about my stuttering, I'd ignore them. So then they thought that I was more remedial than I actually was. And it was just the way I grew up. I was shy and introverted. And I still consider myself an extroverted introvert, but I've done a lot of work to come out of that, a lot of therapy over the years and a lot of other things outside of the 12 steps. But I'll tell you what, alcohol initially leveled the playing field for me. When I was 16 years old, I had my first drink, and I think it was Bacardi and rum with some older guys. They here, drink this. I didn't know what was going on, and what happened was that I was my folks divorced, and I couldn't live with my dad because he had just got remarried to a Hallelujah Christian. That wasn't working for me, and my mom thought I was turning into a hoodlum, and all I was doing was I was in gymnastics, and I was coming home from the gym late and not calling her, thinking I wasn't calling her. And so she thought I was, my mom was she worked for the police department. And so she had cops waiting for me when I'd come home, and I'd walk right past them into my room and they'd blow them off, So rather than live with either one of them, they talked it over and sent me to a public school, but they got me seated with a house with 5 other guys, 5 other incorrigibles in Newport Beach, California. And we had house parents, and these guys were older than me. A couple of them were out of school. And these were the guys that changed everything for me. I mentioned sometimes that when I was 16 years old, almost 17, I took, I learned about LSD, the Baha'i faith, and the Grateful Dead simultaneously. And my life just took a left turn into the cosmos. And this was an early wave of, this is in the early 60s, so it's an early wave of things changing, There were people with long hair and high school graduation tassels hanging from their ear, and people that I just never imagined, And these people became my tribe. These people became the people that were passing me Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. They turned me on to Vonnegut. That was my education. They turned me on the literature of the day. So I was blessed with that. It was a community of people that were educated and that were self-aware, and they gave me all this information. Nevertheless, through all the information that I had, we continued to drink and drug and party, and I was a kid, And so I learned hung with the Rosicrucians for a little while, read Cosmos Conception and studied with them. I ended up in Self-Realization Fellowship for many years, off and on. It was with Paramahansa Yogananda. So I was in spiritual communities, different spiritual communities, and different spiritual ideas. And I continued that. That was my path until at some point or another, the drinking and the drugging took the ability for me to maintain any concept of God, God is all that is away from me. So by the time I got up here from Santa Cruz, California, I was a low bottom dopey and drunk with a whole lot of information about God. And I committed a violent crime and ended up in jail for a year. I got out and I was hustling metals because I was wholly unemployable at the time. I met this guy, Pete, and he was doing it, and he took me under his wing. And what we were doing is hiring guys off the street to pull out metal out of condemned buildings. And then we'd weigh it, and then I'd pay the guys in cash and weed. And then, we'd drink beer afterwards. And it was just kind of just a bunch of street yaks and yahoos. We were all just kind of, we're survival mode. But I was making some money and I'm getting over. And at one point, we're over at the Red Spot or the Hot Spot over by the locks. And we're drinking beer. And I noticed one of these guys wasn't drinking any beer. And I go, this is good beer and this is good weed. What's the matter with you, boy? And he said, I don't drink or drug. And I blew him off. The next day, he came over. The next morning, he says, you know why I don't drink or drug? He says, I said, no, why? He says, I go to Alcoholics Anonymous and I live clean and sober. And something resonated with me. I'd only been up here for 5 months before I went to jail. And then I got out after, I got sentenced to a year, but I got 9 months. So I'd only been up here a short time, but I noticed in my travels and orienting around Seattle that I saw a lot of cars saying with bumper stickers, live and let live, first things first, those kind of things on the back. And I thought, Christian cults, too. So, didn't think much of it. Then, but this guy said, AA, and I went, AA, I've heard of that. I'd like to go to one of those meetings. How much do they cost? And so we made an appointment, and he took me to my first meeting, which is Aurora Fellowship, and it was down 3114 and a half, and Fremont. And I got up the steps, and I sat there and listened to these old guys talk, and these young guys laugh, and it was a different crowd, but they seemed familiar somehow. And there was a comfort about it. And we got down back into the street after the meeting. They asked me what I thought. He said, how do you feel about it? And I said, well, I love the wisdom, and I love the joy that they were exuding. I love the information that was going around. And for sure, if I ever get that fucked up, I'll know where to go, And so that took me about a year and a half to come back. It took me about another year and a half. So I came back and it took me I never really slipped. I've never had a slip. I just never had committed up to that point. I had 4 months sober. I had 3 weeks sober. I had 6 weeks sober. But when I committed in May 7th of 1983, I've never used drugs or alcohol since. I've been clean and sober since then. I had 42 years in this last May. And so I live clean and sober today. And this is when my life began, I mean, I floundered a lot. And I married the woman of my dreams when I was 22 years old. I was just out of the Army and looking for a job. I got a job as a printer, and I drank myself out of that marriage. And I started migrating north from Los Angeles and made it to Monterey. And I was a graphic artist by that time. And I drank myself out of that job. And I moved to Santa Cruz, California, and I involved myself with a jazz club that was just starting. And I spent 2 years there. And this came up in my 10th step, but I just thought about it, so I'll talk about it now, is that, I was still doing cocaine and we were drinking wine and stuff like that. And it was Saturday, and I had the keys to the place. I was auditioning jazz groups. I was sent out to San Francisco and to Los Angeles to call in jazz groups that are high up on the food chain and ask them if they'd come and play, because this was a new jazz club. And So I was drinking a lot and drugging a lot because it seemed glamorous to me. So what I did was, I said, I ran out of money on a Saturday night. I go, she said, why don't I just, you have the keys, I'll go get like $50. And I swear to God, I'll pay it back on Tuesday, And I did that for only about a year and a half, and I probably owed him a couple of grand after that, Never did pay him, and I left Santa Cruz in 1980. That's when I moved up here. And the funny thing about that is that, it's funny, one of the healing factors of staying sober for a long time. I was almost 10 years sober when I was up on Broadway, walking into the post office up there on Broadway and Denny. And Sheba Burney came out. She was head of the chamber of honchos that run the, what? No, not Congress. This is a head of the people that ran the jazz club. There were just 6 of us, and we went, we hugged each other and we embraced and we talked about everything. And I says, as long as we're here, I have an amends. And by this time I'd learned that I didn't make my amends like Alcoholics Anonymous amends. My sponsor told me to be spontaneous about it. And 10 years sober, I had eased into the process of making an amends. And that was kind of organic. And I just said, by the way, during that period of time, I was doing a lot of drugs and drinking a lot, and I stole money out of the till there. And over the time that I've been sober, I've been driving down every winter, and I've been putting in a couple of $100 here and kind of $100 there. And every time I go through Santa Cruz, I do the same, and trying to get square with Kuumba. That was the name of the center. Kuumba means creation in Swahili, and she said, David, we were all fucked up back then. Don't worry about it. And I said, okay. We kept talking. And a few minutes later, she goes, you know what? I do remember that, So, and she recalled it, that she goes, yeah, there were questions of money's missing here and there. So that was one of the, it took me the longest to make amends for this situation, but I felt pretty clean after that. In any event, I'd only been out of jail for a little while. And when I got up to the front room at Fremont, there was all these large white guys telling me what to do. Put the plug in the jug, you just, all you got to do is change your whole life, and it was intimidating, So at the top of the stairs, I hooked the left and walked down the hall, and there was this little smaller room of people that seemed to be a little bit more gentle and more, a little more spiritual, a little more intellectual. They're an older group. And they're my age as well. I was 34, 35 when I came in. And they were the back room, and we took on the name of the back room sickies at Fremont. And that's where I ended up getting sober. And during this time in the early 80s, you didn't pick your sponsor. They picked you. And I was, this little hobbit lady, Pat Trader, she was about this tall, and she wore multicolored berets and capes. And she was just only this tall, but she had time, and everybody loved her, and she didn't have any problem telling you where you were at, And she lied to me one afternoon and told me to come over and help her mow her lawn. And I went over there and weeded the place and mowed her back lawn. And then at dusk, she called me over, and she said, I was about 4 months sober then. And she said, sit down here. We're going to start working the steps. And we talked through the first 3 steps in 20 minutes, and she had me writing before dark. And a lot of people nowadays taking a year or 6 months or however long, they're people are self-indulgent today. I think it's because they haven't, it's just different culture. It's a different culture. Anyway, I ran towards the steps. I never had any hesitation about wanting to try something different. I knew that I'd used up my way of doing things. I knew that I didn't have any friends. I didn't have any girlfriends. I didn't have any prospects or anything. So, hanging upstairs at Fremont was like, oh, yeah, I did have a job. I was a janitor. I got a job as a janitor at the University of Washington out of a work release program, being locked up. So that saved my bacon. It gave me an income, gave me, funds to move around. But I spent every day at noon at Jurassic Fremont. So it was an exciting time, you know. 83, there seemed to be a lot of people came in, and we'd go to dances. There's a blues club up on a Roosevelt there that everybody loved on Saturday night after a Saturday night meeting at 6. And we went to movies together. We just, it was the first time I'd have been to a dinner party with grown-ups since I was like a little kid, you know, where people were actually enjoying themselves and talking and eating food. It was just doing life. It was just simply doing life. At 10 months sober, I realized this, that, at 5 months sober, this is, I get these sequences mixed up because I'm old and I forget shit. I just finished working through the steps, and I just finished doing my 5th step, and I was still kind of shaken off of that because it took me a couple of weeks to kind of come out of that. But I was talking to this one guy, Mark. I'll never forget him because he helped change things for me. We're both the same amount of time sober. We're both working the steps like our life depended on it. And we started sharing our stories. And we both kind of grew up in Southern California, and we both grew up bringing kilos across the border from an early age, from 18. That's when I started. We'd just drive down into Mexico, and we knew a place to go. We'd buy kilos, put them in the door panels, 6 or 7, 12 or 20, 30 or 40, you know, bring them across, break them down in baggies and sell them. That was how we got over. And I was telling him this story about this big ass dope deal that I could have never pulled off. It was a big ass lie. And I stopped about 5 minutes into the story. I went, wait a minute. I go, the last 5 minutes here have been total bullshit. And he looked at me and he just went like, he got me. He went, okay. And I didn't get it right then, but a few days later, it could have been a week later, I was talking to somebody else, and it occurred to me that the way that he accepted me at that moment, the way that he just kind of went, oh yeah, we're like this close to, you know, like this close together talking. And he got me. And he got me for exactly who I was and who I was not. And Alcoholics Anonymous became the safest place I'd ever been. You know, it was real freedom. It was the first time I felt some real freedom because I got accepted someplace, you know. Changed everything. It illuminated me because then I started feeling part of something. And at 10 months sober, and this struck me like a lightning bolt, that it was like, oh my God, it's like this. And I was in the front room when this happened. I was in the back room with this meeting. But I realized that the easy part of recovery is quitting the drugs and drinking. That's the skate part. The ongoing struggle that we have, and that's what the 12 steps are built around, I imagine, is detoxing the attitudes that kept me separate from myself and from people and places and opportunities I didn't get when I was running and ducking. And it's been an ongoing process of recovery for me to get that. I had to let go of the attitudes. I let go of I was a dope crazed hippie Chicano dope dealer from LA. So I walked a little tougher. I dressed a little tighter. I dressed more street. You know, that was one thing. I used to hang. You know, felt real comfortable down in the market. You know, down First and Pike. I was at ease down there. And years passed, and we're coming out of the Fifth Avenue Playhouse one night, and we're dressed up with the gal that I'm with and some other friends. And we started heading down that way, and I started getting a little like nervous. You know, so I started realizing, I'm a citizen now, you know? It's like, I mean, I have those distinctions. I don't have them. They're not close to me anymore, but it's a process of maturity. That's what it is. Recovery has been maturity to me. I've had to let go of things that kept me from being in certain places at a certain time. Today I feel socially acceptable wherever I am. You understand, I grew up a middle-class kid. And I was in therapy once with this guy that I love. He's no longer here. I was with him for 6 years up on the hill, and we in the conversation he came up with that must have been hard for you growing up. So you know the way you grew up in the barrio, you know. And I go, Jim, I didn't grow up in the barrio. I grew up in Newport Beach, man. I grew up on the beach. And his whole he goes, well, how did you get so tough and so street smart? I go, I put myself in the street. You know, it was just the people that I chose. I drank with a lower caste of human beings as time went on. As my drug addiction accelerated and my drinking accelerated, the shit that I learned, the holy part of me diminished. And I continued to drink until I was by myself. That's just the way it occurred for me. That's why today I can say easily that I walk in gratitude for what Alcoholics Anonymous has given me. It's given me a lot. It's given me an opportunity to be all the things that I used to lie about. You know, I have today as a result of just hanging around this amount of time is that I have a 40-year-old daughter with 2 children. She's never seen me drunk or loaded. I have a relationship with Sally over here that I couldn't have made up. You know, we travel, we do stuff. You know, we have the resources to be able to enjoy our life. We went to the Vancouver World Conference. That's where we were this last weekend. You know, and we had a great time with some wonderful old timers that some loving people. Roy and Carol, I don't know if you know them, but they're great. So I don't know how it happened. It's just I think I've had a blessed life. You know, I've had a blessed life because I was looking at 5 to 20 years, and I got a year. You know, about prison. I bumbled my way. I created a business out of nothing. I've been a grunt on a rope. I had a high-rise window cleaning business for 30 years. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I was selling medical supplies and I liked it, but I didn't like the community. So I floundered for about a year. And then the house that I was sharing in Fremont, I started cleaning the windows, and some Filipino guy came from across the street and says, "Well, you clean my windows?" And one thing led to another. And then I started looking up, and I became a high-rise window cleaning guy. So I've been a grunt on a rope, and I'm retired now. And when I got to tell you this, Sally and I we met late in life. You know, this is late in life. You know, I'm pushing 80, and Sally's a whippersnapper. We were sitting around one night, and I told her I did some modeling, and you know, I was hanging from a high-rise building, and this beautiful woman came to the window, and we started talking, and it ends up that she's Tiffany of Tiffany Talents, a talent agency, and she said, "You're the perfect age and look for middle-aged Chicanos. You know, we have work for extras. I can get you a lot of work." So I said, okay. So I took some classes and I started doing that. I just did it for a year and a half or so, maybe 2 years. But that was in the early 80s. Oh, no, I'm sorry, that was in the early 90s. And I mentioned to Sally that I was in this movie with Jennifer Aniston called Love Happens. It came out in 2009. And she said, "Well, did you see yourself in it?" I go, "No, I did a lot of stuff then, and it didn't interest me to like find myself in a movie or anything like that, because I'd seen it in other situations." She went out and found the movie on a CD, and we settled down to watch it. She put it in, and we watched every frame of this movie, and I wasn't in it. You know? So she goes, "Oh," I laughed because it was no big deal to me. But that my mate for life is a type A personality. She starts scrolling and finds all these jobs as an extra. So this is what our hobby is today. We've been for 3 years now. We've been extras in the movies. We've been in we flew to New York to be in Marvelous Mrs. Maisel and Succession, and we go down to LA to binge shows. We've been in westerns where she was like a whore in a madame in a whorehouse, you know, and I was a bad sheriff, you know. But you know, we have you know, so this is how I live today. So I'm grateful. I have my grandkids and my daughter coming out here to spend a month next week, this next week, and it's all because I stumbled and bumbled in my way into Alcoholics Anonymous. So, actually, my first meeting in 1981 was in NA. I went to NA, and I went there, and there was a guy named Lionel Earl. And after the meeting, he came over and he had me step aside, and he goes, "It sounds like you sound like you're like you want to get sober." And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, you might think about seeking your broadest base of support. And that'd be Alcoholics Anonymous, because NA was new. It was like brand new. Long-term sobriety was 6 months, and we were lying about that. You know, so I was sitting next to like Junkie John and a guy named Rod, and Rod passed out and fell out of his chair, and his kid falls out on the ground. And those are stupid moments, but I'm remembering a lot of things that I just hadn't intended to say. I hope I didn't break anybody's anonymity. But I'm still continuing the detox. So let me leave you with this. There's this metaphor. I stole it from one of my favorite Buddhist instructors, teacher. The metaphor goes like this. When I first arrived here, I lived in this little old house. There were no other houses around. It was isolated, and there was no electricity or running water, and all the windows and doors were nailed shut. And it was dark inside, and I couldn't see anything. And everywhere I stepped, I bumped into myself. I bumped into my arrogance, and my low self-esteem, and my contempt prior to investigation, and the fear about the future, and the horror of my past. So time passes. I find recovery. And today, I live in an airplane hangar. All my shit's still inside. I just don't bump into it as often, you know? So I don't expect to be perfect about anything. I just have a pile of crap over here that I can step aside and not be that anymore. You know, I've used it up, and it doesn't happen consistently, but the power of recovery is that I have a choice in the matter of my life. I have a choice in the matter of my life, and that makes me a winner. That makes me a winner in recovery. So thanks for letting me share.